So I'm very excited and happy to introduce M. William Phelps, who is, you are right in Ellington, is that correct? In Connecticut, based out of there?
Yeah, that area, yeah, Talon
Yeah.
County. Yep,
Okay, great.
yep,
So,
yeah.
the fact that you're local is cool, even though we are on Zoom and he's kind of all over the place as well. So we really appreciate you being here. Um, I know you have some fans joining us who know a lot about you already, but for those who do not, um, William Phelps is the New York Times bestselling author of 45 books and the winner of the Excellence in Investigative Journalism Award from the Society of Professional Journalists. Phelps has written for numerous publications, including the Providence Journal, Connecticut Magazine, and the Hartford Courant. Diversifying his talents, Phelps consulted on the first season of the hit Showtime cable television series Dexter. I don't know if we have Dexter fans with us, all of which gives him a confluence of expertise and experience to bring to true crime fans. He is the exec producer, writer, and host of the #1 true crime podcast franchise, Paper Ghosts, and Now Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps, an ongoing weekly podcast diving deeply into murder, missing people, and unsolved cold cases rarely covered. His other podcast, White Eagle, is a narrative limited series focused on one of the largest cash heists in American history and the search for the man and the money who has spent the longest time on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list. He has also consulted in true crime television, executive produced documentaries, and weekly series. So he's a sought after expert and speaker for his extensive knowledge regarding historic and contemporary serial killers and the psychology shaping the mind of the murderer. So we are really thrilled to have Mr. Phelps with us tonight. So thank you for joining us.
All
And
right,
I'm
thanks
going to
for
turn it
asking.
over to you.
You're going to turn it over to me. Well, you brought up some good points before we started. If you want to just talk about that a little bit, and I can get into that.
Absolutely.
Uh,
I was kind of fascinated by this because of the fact that true crime has become such a cultural phenomenon. And I wonder what it says about us. Have we just sort of become spectators of the macabre and sort of interested in all of this, darkness that's maybe, different from our lives, and, maybe in the same way that people read fantasy or horror as an escape? Or do these retellings prevent future crimes from happening, and can we actually look at it as a prevention method? So I'm kind of fascinated with that, and I wonder what your experience tells you about that.
well, I mean, I get asked that question a lot. Why is true crime become so big? When I first started in the 90s, I mean, it was, you were looked at, your books were in the bookstore, in the corner of the store, on the bottom shelf by the toilet. That's where they kept the true crime section. So it's come a long way from the back of the store, up to the front of the store. So that's good. Um, well, I don't think it's a preventative thing. We're not watching this to prevent crime. I think we're watching a lot of this because we're by our own condition, we're conditioned to be curious, and we all want to solve a mystery. I actually wrote an article for I hate to admit this, but they came to me, AARP, about this. Ugh. And and one of the things I talked about in it was you know, a big show in the 70s and 80s was Columbo, right? So Columbo was a huge franchise drama. Um, but what's interesting about Columbo is that within 90 seconds, you know who the murderer is. So you're in that for the next 90 minutes to see how he catches the murderer, right? So, and we can even take it back further to Scooby-Doo as a child watching TV. We're interested in the murder mystery. Um, some people find this is bizarre to me, but some people find comfort in the murder shows they watch. I hear this all the time. They leave it on while they're falling asleep and all this sort of thing. No judgment. It's strange to me that But I think we're just curious people, you know, we want to know, we also want to see the bad guy caught. That gives us a sense of accomplishment, a sense of pleasure, a sense of, okay, we got the bad guys. And the interesting fact is that, you know, crime in general, violent crime, rape, murder, those numbers are half of what they were 25 years ago. Crime has dropped in half, but the reporting of it has skyrocketed 1,000 and something percent. So it's twofold, you know. We think there's more crime, but there's actually a lot less. So, and you had a second thought you wanted to ask me about, Rachel?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the quote that I read by you. You said, "We cannot just create murder dramas and nonfiction crime TV any way we want to. We need to take responsibility for how we portray killers and especially their victims in fiction and nonfiction. It is imperative to our collective understanding with regards to how to better protect ourselves against violence." So I want to just know about your experience consulting on some of these and talking a little bit more about that quote.
Well, we have to have responsibility when we, as people who make true crime, be it an executive producer, or a writer, podcaster. You need to have responsibility and accountability. So you need to be responsible enough to tell the victim's story, because it ultimately needs to be about that person, because the murderer becomes the headline right after. So yes, we can't spend 300 pages of a book talking about a victim. No one's going to read that, right? But we need to always keep in mind the victims' families, their loved ones, their friends, who they are, who they were. Keep that in mind as we're telling the stories we're telling, and always respect them, no matter who they are. And a lot of that quote was generated from, you know, at the time, I was doing a lot of television, investigative television, and I was looking at unsolved serial killer cases throughout the country. Now, a lot of unsolved serial killer cases, the victims are sex workers. And to me, I don't care if you're a sex worker, you're a drug addict, or you're a CEO at a company. Once you're a victim of murder, it doesn't matter what you did. It matters that you were murdered, and now we want to find out what happened to you and who you were as a person. We are not what we do, right? For a living or whatever. So that stuff is very, very important to me. We always need to be pay attention to the things we're saying about people who are involved in these cases. We have to always be mindful of what we're saying and how we're portraying them. And it's something, you know, most of the time when I do a big piece, like, for example, when I do a season of Paper Ghosts, which is an investigative podcast, you know, I'm investigating, generally speaking, an unsolved murder or missing person case. If the victims' families are not involved in that with me, I'm out. I'm not doing it. You know, that's number one. You know, when I'm writing a book, it's the same thing. If I don't have the victims' families okay, if they don't want me to do it, I'm not doing it. You know, I've been in that position many times, and I've passed on it. So you know, and you know, and a lot of people are doing it wrong. That it was another point of mine. A lot of people do it wrong today. But I don't know. So you want me, what would you like me? You want me to talk about my latest project? I know there's probably a lot of people on there by now who want me to talk about my latest project, or maybe I won't.
I would certainly love that. I'd also like to know a little bit of backstory of how you got involved in all this to begin with? What came first, author, journalist? Can you let us know a little bit about your background?
I mean, the day before I became a true crime writer, I didn't know that I was a true crime writer. It wasn't something I aspired to be. I just, I realized quickly that writing for the Providence Journal or the Hartford Courant or a magazine, I was not going to make a living. So I hooked up with an agent, and he was like, you got to write books if you wanna. So I just looked for a great story. He said, find a great story. I mean, I had written about everything, politics, music. I wrote a lot about music because I was a musician in the 80s. I guess I qualified as a musician because I played it and they gave me money. But so I wrote about anything, interesting stories. I wanted to tell stories about people. So I latched onto a case in the late 90s. It was there was a trial going on in Springfield. There was a nurse, and she was on trial for killing 7 people, and word was that she had killed a lot more. So I started attending that trial. There were 60,000 pages of transcripts for that trial, ultimately, that I sat for a year and read through in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then I set out to investigate and do more work. And it became my first book, and it was successful. And so, in publishing, when you're successful, they say, just give me more of that thing, stamp another one out. So I just followed it. And then the TV stuff came through that. And I started to attend forensic conferences and, take different types of criminology courses and hook up with investigators, detectives, and learn from them, etc. Had mentors, and they taught me how to investigate. I had the journalism part, so I kind of just merged into the investigative part. And then, of course, the podcasting came from that. Again, it came to me. I didn't go to it. They asked me, so I did it, and I just brought my work into podcasting, what I did. And I just try to tell stories. I'm not there to make decisions about what people did or didn't do. I'm there to tell the story. When I'm doing an unsolved case, I'm there to bring answers to the family of the victim. That's why I'm there. And that's my goal always, is to give them answers. So with adjudicated cases, I'm writing a book or I'm doing a podcast, my job is to tell the story the best way that I possibly can with as many sources as I can. It's not to inject my venomous opinion into it, or make judgments about people or anything like that. It's to tell this story. Which leads me to this case that I'm working on now. It's the Karen Reed case out of Canton, Massachusetts, and the 3rd episode of a 10-episode narrative podcast limited series it will be released this Thursday. And if for those of you who don't know, Karen Reed, financial person, in her 40s, worked at Fidelity, by all accounts, very successful, very smart. Her boyfriend is a Boston cop, 2 years. And on January 29th, 2022, after drinking at a bar with a bunch of friends, her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, he winds up dead on the front lawn of a fellow Boston police officer's house where they were going over to have like after bar drinks. And what ultimately looks like a simple type of drunk driving, accidentally hit her boyfriend and took off type of thing, has turned into a conspiracy. I mean, there's this huge conspiracy going on that she was framed, which Karen Reed herself started. I mean, she was the one who planted that seed when she was arrested the 2nd time for murder. She drops this bombshell on the state police and says, that John was murdered inside the house by, and she names a cop and she names his nephew. And so thus starts this whole thing about, is it a conspiracy to frame her, or is it just a simple hit and run, and she took off, and she didn't mean to kill him, but she did, and she left him to die in the cold. So that's what the 10 episodes are focused on, unraveling this by talking to as many people as I can. And, you know, when I first saw this case, I had no interest in it at all. It just wasn't my thing. And then somebody came to me and said, you know, you ought to look into it a little bit more. I can put you in touch with this this blogger who goes by the name Turtle Boy, which is a very strange name. And his name is Aidan Carney, and he kind of got the inside into this case, and he was kind of writing all these blogs, and he was like dropping bombshells, accusing people of murder and this conspiracy, and he's laying it all out for people, and he's getting these followers, or so, you know, he's gaining this audience, and he's starting to do these types of rallies, you know, going to witnesses' houses and calling them murderers, this sort of thing, killers, cop killers. And ultimately, he winds up being arrested and put in jail, and he spends 60 days in jail. Karen's trial comes around in 2004, earlier this year, and there's no verdict. It's a hung jury. So she goes back to trial this coming January. So, you know, there was this story. I said, well, let me take a look at it and talk to Turtle Boy and see, you know, what he has to say. So I started talking to him, and one thing led to another, and I'm like, all right, I'll do something with it. You know, there's really nothing to investigate here. I mean, it's more or less just telling the story from the point of view of the people who were involved. The other part of it that I was really interested in is the polarization here. You know, I've never in my 25-year career have seen a case where the viciousness of the online hatred people have for one another, in this case, depending on what you believe. Either you believe she did it, or you believe she was framed, and these people clash, and they haul insults, personal attacks. People call their work, their job, they call their house, they send food to the, you know, there's all this stuff going on. It's just this shitstorm of, like, I couldn't believe it when I saw it. And everybody seems to have an opinion in this case. And if you speak it, you know, you are vilified by someone. So that interested me. The town of Canton, where this happened, you know, was kind of split, and there's all kinds of issues in the Canton Select Board and that sort of thing. So that interested me. I wanted to get at, you know, what is this? What's causing this? What really is going on here? So that's basically what's happening in the podcast. And in the first couple episodes, I'm just laying out this case and, you know, telling the story. With that, I mean, my other podcast, Paper Ghosts, is heading into season 5. I'm getting ready to start investigating that, and I've been investigating this case for, you know, a number of years, and I'm getting ready to head out to Texas and start recording people and digging in sometime before the end of the year, and I'll have that out next year, Paper Ghosts season 5. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, you got into it a little bit. I was going to ask you kind of how technology has changed your ability to do your job, either with forensics or with just the internet, et cetera.
Well, digital forensics now is a big part of every case, really, you get involved in, you know, phones, computers, et cetera. So there's a lot, you know, there's all kinds of digital evidence that, for me, is kind of ironclad. You know, it's kind of this type of evidence that's just sits there, and it doesn't, there's no, you know, it doesn't say anything other than what the computer data says. And then we have experts that come in and interpret that and say, you know, this is what it means. So digital forensics is pretty ironclad, you know, for the most part. And so that has changed, because years ago you didn't have any of that stuff. For me, technology, yeah, I can do a lot more interviews Zoom now, which I like. You know, I don't have to travel all over the country for the most part. Sometimes I can do a lot from my office. But yeah, it's definitely changed. Uh, Forensics, you know, I think one thing true crime has done is kind of poisoned a little bit of the juries. They want the smoking gun now because they see it all the time on television. They want, you know, that where is that smoking gun? We want that iron. We want that forensic DNA. We want it, and you know, so maybe that's changed for juries. Yeah, but overall, it hasn't changed how I do my job much. No.
Well, I've been asking questions, but I wanted to know if anybody else on the call has a question for William. I've given you the power to unmute yourself. Or you can certainly put it in the chat as well, and I'll ask it for you. Do we have some fans of the podcast on with us?
Hi, Matthew.
Hi.
Roseanne, how are you?
Hi, Roseanne. How are you?
Hi,
Good,
good,
good to
thank
hear your
you.
voice. Yeah.
Nice to hear yours. So one, I'm a huge fan. And I just want you to know I'm thankful that you are local because there's something it puts a different spin on everything, I think. And I actually stumbled upon you. Anyway, so thank you for everything that you do. And my
Oh,
question
thank you.
is, aside from people requesting cases like with crossing the line, like if people email and request cases, how do you ultimately decide what cases to actually cover? Because I can imagine there are so many out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Well, number one, there has to be a lot of documentation associated with the case, and there has to be a lot of people willing to speak to me. So that's first. If that's not part of what is going to happen, then I'm kind of out. You mentioned Crossing the Line. So Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps is my weekly podcast. And what I do there is just tell a story basically for a half hour. It's a weekly show. I tell a different case each week. It's not an investigative thing. It's just, you know, a weekly show. But when I do the investigative stuff, yeah, it all depends. And I juggle several stories at a time. So whatever case I'm moving forward the most is the one I usually follow and go to next. It's all about access, you know, for me, because without access, I can't investigate. I can't get in there and see what's going on with the case.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Roseanne, for
Thank you.
showing up tonight. Yeah.
Of course.
Nice.
Thank you. Best wishes moving forward with everything you're doing.
Thanks a lot.
The next question is from Carrie Ann. Is there anything you'd like to explore in your career that you haven't had a chance to do yet?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean there is, and I've managed to do that, which should be out next year, a book that I don't really want to mention at this point what that is, but it's not true crime at all. It has nothing to do with true crime. It's fiction, and it's a series, and it's not mystery. It's something entirely different. It's what I've wanted to do since I was a kid. Thinking about writing. So yeah, that'll probably come out late next year or the year after.
We have a comment from Sharon. Many years ago at the Windsor Library, I enjoyed your presentation about your book about Amy Archer Gilligan.
The Devil's Rooming House. Yeah. The Devil's Rooming House is the true story of arsenic and old lace. And it takes place in Windsor, Connecticut around 1910, and it's Amy Archer Gilligan is a female serial killer, and I spent 6 years on that book. It was a bear to get information for that, but I ended up putting it all together, and it's an incredible story, really. It's where the Joseph Kessel ring got, you know, built Arsenic and Old Lace, the play, and ultimately the movie out of. And it's a vicious, you know, violent serial killer killing people. And she's a woman. She just doesn't bury them in her basement. That's made up.
Alicia asks, are there any updates on season 1 of Paper Ghosts? My mom was a teenager in Rockville when the women and girls went missing in the area.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And I mean, update is that there is a cold case squad kind of dedicated to that case right now that is formed. So that's an update, and they are actively looking into it. You know, I get asked that a lot, and it's like, I worked 12 years on that case and I can't take it any further. You know, I've done all I can with the resources that I have. So now I just hand everything over to the cold case people. I can't do anything else for that case. I spent 12 years with that. And I just that now law enforcement is really actively looking into the case. It's hard. It's 50-year-old cold cases with no crime scene, no body, no information, are very hard to solve. So, you know, it takes a lot of tedious kind of, you know, shoe leather to get answers in cases like that.
Sandy wants to say thank you for giving the victims a voice, and I
Oh,
appreciate that you are
thank
so
you.
compassionate toward the families and friends of the victims. Is it possible to ask you to tell your sister-in-law's story?
Yeah, I mean, well, my brother's wife was 5 months pregnant and she was strangled to death in Hartford, Connecticut. There's not much more to tell than that. It's an unsolved case. My brother died about 5, 6 years after that. Uh, and last I was told was that they do know who did it. They just, the forensics are not there yet. The technology hasn't caught up to the forensics that they have. So it's no surprise who did it to those people who, you know, in the family. But that's, I mean, there's really not much more to tell than that, you know. I mean, I did go into more detail, obviously, in a book I wrote called Dangerous Ground. And yeah, it's a strange thing to you know, when I sit with a victim's family, you know, I can kind of empathize with them because I know what it's done to my family. I know the ripple effect of murder, what it does to a family as it spreads through. So I can kind of bond with families who are going through the same thing because I've seen it, I've experienced it. So you know, it's not the reason I do what I do, but it's part of what I do, certainly.
I'm gonna go to Cass now, who has their hand up.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yeah.
First off, thank you so much for your advocacy with victims. It's very commendable and also very rare, especially with authors in your genre. And I'm kind of curious, especially since you mentioned, you know, knowing that suspect and knowing they did it, like, how do you deal with the frustration of just not enough evidence to be prosecuted? Because I know in my own case, I'm widowed and knew who murdered him. Ended up, you know, he died several months later just because of his lifestyle, but it was still so frustrating because it felt like justice just didn't happen.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying what you said about my victims advocacy. I appreciate that. Yeah, you know, I hear this sometimes. It's very frustrating. It's very, you feel like you're being singled out, like, you know, there's some sort of vendetta there with the law enforcement against you. And, you know, not having any justice or answers is very causes a lot of anxiety, and it's very frustrating. And there's really not a lot you can do, right? I've seen families take the activism part and kind of, you know, get a lawyer and start to sue for documentation. There's a case I'm going to be working on after Paper Ghosts. where it was ruled a suicide, but the family was certain that she was murdered. And the father spent upwards of, 10 years suing everybody he could, the courts, the DA, everybody, to get everything from the case. He got everything from the case. He spent years going through the case. He put together a presentation. He brought it to the DA, and the DA said, okay, we will convene a grand jury and we'll start looking at what you're saying. Thank you. So it's very hard to take that route. I understand, but and on the other end, I might say that for the most part, law enforcement wants to solve these cases. They want to give you answers, but a lot of times it's about money, resources. It's about not having any type of information that they can really catch a lead on and go on. Because with law enforcement work, investigative work, you have to understand that 98% of what you do is just it's a dead space. It's a blank, it's a brick wall. But you're in it for that 2%, which opens up the floodgates. So it's really hard, and I'm sorry you're going through that. It's frustrating. So I get it, but squeaky wheel gets the oil is what I can say without being, overly harassing them. Get a good feel for, maybe I show up once a month and say what's going on.
Yeah, I think the run-in that they just had is that, their suspect who did it even confessed to it, like he died later. And
Wow.
it's just that frustration of kind of knowing we know who it is, but because they couldn't prosecute and because so many other things are still open because they couldn't verify with them, it's still a open case.
Yeah,
And
maybe
it's like that lack of closure.
Yeah, maybe someday a prosecutor comes in and he'll close it for you. It won't take much, it sounds like, to close it. But, good luck with that. I wish you well with that.
Thank you.
We have some comments, no question. Just wanted to say that I have enjoyed the TV shows and podcasts. Keep up the good work. I'd like to, nope, I already asked that one. Any chance Dark Minds?
I want to hear
Is
a
coming
question
back.
from Crazy. That's what I want a question from the
You
person named Crazy. I want to see what kind of question there's a person on here. The name is Crazy, so I want a question from Crazy. So think of one, Crazy. Okay, what was that, Rachel? Dark
Kevin.
Minds?
Yeah, Kevin, any chance Dark Minds could come back on TV with new episodes?
Not a chance. Not a chance. It served its purpose. It had 3 seasons. I mean, 3 seasons for any TV show is a really good run. In many ways, the projects that I have in the pipeline now for TV are Dark Minds. They're just in a different format. 3-episode, docuseries about this case, 3-episode docuseries about another case. So essentially it is Dark Minds, just under a different title every 3 episodes in a different case. It's just the way TV works now. TV's a different thing now. It's all that docuseries streaming stuff. That's what they want. They don't want Dark Minds anymore, but I enjoyed doing it. I was grateful to have that show.
Do you have another case that you're particularly proud of the way it was handled?
One of my cases?
Mm-hmm.
Proud in a way that it was handled in the courtroom, or
well, the outcome, I guess, and just that you feel that you made a difference.
Oh yeah, season 4 of Paper Ghosts, I've really moved the needle on that significantly, and it doesn't end with the last episode. I am continuing in a different format, not with Paper Ghosts, but I am continuing the investigation that ended in season 4 of Paper Ghosts for a television series that I'm doing, a docuseries. So but it blew, you know, some of the work I did there just blew the case open. So it opened a lot of doors, and you know, not by me alone. I mean, I was part of it, but certainly not, I'm not taking credit for it. But so that continues, yeah. So yeah, I'm very, you know, Paper Ghost is a show that I can really bring answers to families, and I'm really grateful to be able that iHeartRadio has supported me in doing that, and they give me executive producer power to do what I need to do in that. They don't, you know, hold a wand over me. So I'm really appreciative of that. Yeah.
Christina wants to know, do you prefer writing, podcasting, or TV for bringing these cases to the public eye?
Well, Christine, that is a really great question. And the answer to that is when I get up every day at 5 a.m., I write for 4 or 5 hours. So writing is my soul, puts my soul at ease. And whether I'm writing a book or podcast or TV, it's all writing. It all starts with writing. A podcast starts with writing. A TV show starts with the writing. It's just different kinds of writing. A book obviously is all writing. But yeah, writing is where my heart is, and I still do it every day. I just, you know, I just then get off of that and do other things associated with it throughout the day. So, but the podcast writing has proved to be, I mean, I think I got it pretty figured out now, but at first it was very challenging because, you know, you're telling stories in a much more condensed way in podcasting than you would in a book per se. And in TV, the TV writing is even more pared down. It's, you know, there's a lot of moving parts. So yeah, I prefer to write, and I'm writing, so I'm grateful, you know, that I'm able to do it. Crazy? Come on.
Guess what? She's crazy quilt patcher. She doesn't have any questions, just likes the info you provide. She's from Tennessee.
All right, crazy. Shout out to Tennessee. I've spent a lot of time in Knoxville, filmed a lot in Knoxville with Jupiter Entertainment. They're out of Knoxville, and been to obviously Nashville.
So for people who haven't maybe delved into this as much and aren't in the know, what would you suggest they start with to find out a little bit about your work?
Well, if they're a book person, and this is a library kind of thing, you know, start with Perfect Poison. That was my first book. People love that book. It's a true crime book. Perfect Poison is a good book to start with. I mean, if you're a hardcore true crimer and you really like the hardcore stuff, go with a book called Where Monsters Hide. That's some serious stuff there. It's about a female serial killer from Michigan that I interviewed and investigated. Podcasting, you know, start with Paper Ghost season 1. That's a really personal type of case, and that'll get you into, you know, the next thing. If you're looking for a weekly type of true crime experience in podcasting where, you know, you want a story from start to finish in a half hour, that's Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps, my weekly show. And it, yeah, and which I love doing. And yeah, TV, I don't know, whatever you can. The latest thing that I have on TV is something called Little Miss Innocent. It's on Hulu. I produced that. It just came out in September. It's based on my book, We Thought We Knew You. And it's called Little Miss Innocent. And it's about a sociopath who thinks she can fool everybody. I tend to gravitate towards writing and podcasting about those types of individuals.
Okay. Is there a case that has haunted you in the way that it keeps you up at night wondering what happened?
Not necessarily. This stuff doesn't keep me up at night anymore. It did at one time, I mean, many years ago, but no, I mean, I say this in the first or second episode of this podcast that's running now, 34 Fairview Road, about the Karen Reed case, that, when you come down to it, when you look at a murder case, generally speaking, the simplest answer is the answer. It's not some sort of convoluted Netflix 8-part series. It's generally what you think it is. And you have to get from there to a courtroom and then into a jury room and get a guilty verdict if you're a prosecutor or you're a detective. But generally, when you look at, it's like when detectives go to a house and they have a spouse that's been murdered, female or male, it doesn't matter. They throw a dart on the dartboard, and 99 times out of 100, it's going to hit the other spouse. That's just the way that's just the way it is. So they look at that first. Why wouldn't you? So cases that keep me up at night. The brutality of some cases, certainly, I think about every once in a while, how brutal some cases are. And I tend to try to stay away from those, now, just because, I stay away from generally kids stuff and brutal stuff. I tend to want to tell stories about people, and murder's obviously a part of that. But yeah. I'm sorry. I wish I had an answer for that. I know I'll think of one later tonight when I'm wide awake. Thank you very much. But
somebody thinks the answer to that might be Happy Face.
They might think that, but nah, I don't think about him much anymore. There was certainly a time when he was, consuming me. And they're basing that comment on, reading the book Dangerous Ground. And certainly there was a time when he had infected me, but not anymore. I don't think he's murdered anybody else. I think all the questions I wanted answered over this 12 years that I interviewed him, I got answered. I don't think there's any more that left to tap out of that keg. But no, it's a good comment. It's a fair comment.
Do you feel restricted in any way with your podcasts? Was the decision to produce Crossing the Line on your own to be more candid?
Yeah, well, what happened with Crossing the Line was interesting because Paper Ghost was a huge hit. It was #1 in the world for 6, 7, 8 weeks when it first came out, and then every season it went #1. So it was. And then we did Crossing the Line, and then we got into a little discussion when the end of the term contract came for Crossing the Line. We got into a discussion about what they wanted to do, and they didn't want to do much. So I said, well, I'll just take it back and do it myself. And we all came to that agreement, and they allowed me to take it. And it's not that I'm doing it independently. So there's no media company over my head paying me. So what I mean by independently is I produce the show. I hire people to help me produce the show. And me and myself and my management, Matthew Valentinas, my manager, who has a Mom's Basement Media company, we own it. We own it together, and we sell advertising for it. So that's what I mean by independent, which allows me to do whatever I want with it, right? It's allowed me to do, it's like this 34 Fairview Road. I didn't want to go to a media company and sell this to anybody. I wanted to do this quick, and I wanted to do it timely. And so I did it under the Crossing the Line Presents model. So it's in that feed. So it's it's great because I can choose the cases I want, like the format I want with Crossing the Line. I can do whatever I want with it. And it's kind of found its groove now. It's the same show every week, different case. And it's not going to change because people tell me they love it. So it's like, I want to make what people want. I don't want to make what they don't want. That's not a good business model.
Christina has a great question. What do you read as a true crime writer?
Well, right here, I don't know if you can see it, but I can just pick something out for you. I read stuff like this. Is that backwards?
Oh, we can see it.
Okay, yeah, I read a lot of religious history. I read a lot of writer biographies, a lot of like famous author biographies from the past 100 years, for the only reason that I can relate to a lot of the stuff in it, you know. But I also read, my favorite writer is a guy named Karl Ove Narsgaard, who wrote a series of books called My Struggle. 3,000 pages worth, like 6 volumes, and now he's just released 3 volumes of a novel. So he's my favorite. He's from Norway. He's my favorite writer. So I don't read true crime. I mean, there was a time when I did, obviously, but I don't anymore. I don't watch it. I don't read it. I work with it 15 hours a day, so why would I want to watch it or read it? And I watch gardening shows. That calms me down.
Have you read Stephen King's On Writing?
Oh, yeah.
Several teachers use it in their classrooms.
Yeah, I mean, when I used to teach a publishing writing course for adult education years ago, and I used to always, I mean, that was like the Bible. I mean, that is the Bible. If you want to write, you read that book 10 times. Read it over and over and over and over again. And I mean, he knows what he's doing. You know, I mean, you can't argue with success, and he's, but yeah, that's a good book on writing. Yeah, very good book on writing, called On Writing, ironically.
Anything you can tell us about what you are working on? Well, you started with that. I don't know if
Yeah,
they're looking, what else they might be looking for.
I mean, I'm finishing up 34 Fairview Road right now, so I got a couple more episodes to produce for that, and that'll be done, and then it's some time off, and then I'm gonna jump right into Paper Ghost 5, which takes place in Texas. I don't want to say too much about that because it's a very, for the first time, it's a very dangerous situation. So I don't want to say too much about what I'm doing when I'm doing it with that, because it's a very volatile situation I'm stepping into there. Yeah.
Are you going to do a giveaway on social media for the chance to win a seat on your upcoming cruise? Because that would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, I'd love to do that. The cruise is, there's some scheduling issues with that, so we're gonna have to, we're meeting actually in a couple weeks to talk about that, to see if I can still pull it off, because they hit me up with some scheduling stuff. So we're gonna see if it still happens. If it does, I will definitely give away a seat, a room. Absolutely, I will. Absolutely.
Can you tell us more about what that is? The cruise?
Oh, the cruise is a cruise up the Rhine, from Amsterdam up to almost Italy, where it's a week, and I'm going to do like 2 live podcasts. I'm going to eat dinner with everybody every night, and I'm gonna narrate some of the stuff when we stop and go to like a town where there's a crazy serial killer in the Alps or something. I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to do other things on the boat, give lectures and meet with people and stuff like that. So it's a true crime experience. Yeah. It sounds, they came to me and asked me, and I said, sure, that sounds like fun. So, yeah. So it's really not a vacation, but it is, right?
Did you say you had a book in the works, or but you said it's not true crime?
Not true crime. It's not mystery. It's not a thriller. It's something that will be unexpected from this guy. It's not romance, but it's something I've wanted to do since I was a child, and I had the opportunity, And I did it. And I just have to write 2 more now before the first one comes out. So as soon as I have a chance to write 2 more, the first one will be out and likely end of next year or the beginning of the following year.
All right, well, don't forget your library friends. when
No,
you do
not,
that.
and I see the question. No, it's not fantasy or sci-fi either. It's not. Oh, tomorrow might be hitting on something there. If you like Yellowstone, you might like what I'm gonna pull out of the Phelps catalog. You might like what I have in store.
Love it. All right, keep them guessing. Any other questions?
That's funny.
Doesn't Stephen King have a Western series?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's killing in it, so there will be murder in it. For all you murder people, there's going to be lots of murder in this book. I promise you that. It's just a different type of murder. It's justified murder.
Thank you, Cass. All right, folks, if there are no other questions, we're going to let William go, but we really, really appreciate your being with us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rachel. This was great. I really enjoyed this and all the kind words people said. Thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me.
Thank you, everyone, and I'll send out an email with some of the recommendations you gave for us for starter ideas and things like that.
Yeah, and tune into 34 Fairview Road, Thursday night's the next episode.
Excellent. Everywhere you can get your podcasts, everything's available. So just let us know if you have any questions. Have a good evening, everyone.
Peace out, Girl Scouts.